We are live on Facebook. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's Wednesday, and we're really excited tonight to have Susan Wiggs here with us. We're going to be talking about her new book, The Lost and Found Bookshop. Real quickly, Susan Wiggs' life is all about family and friends and fiction. She lives at the water's edge on an island in Puget Sound, and in good weather, she commutes to her writers group in a 21-foot motorboat. She's been featured in the national media, including NPR, PRI, and USA Today, has given programs for U.S. embassies in Buenos Aires and Montevideo, and is a popular speaker locally, nationally, internationally, and on the high seas. She's an international best-selling, award-winning author with millions of copies of her books in print in numerous countries and languages. According to Publishers Weekly, Wiggs writes with refreshing, honest emotion, and the Salem Statesman Journal adds that she is one of our best observers of stories of the heart, who knows how to capture emotion on virtually every page of the book. Booklist characterizes her books as real and true and unforgettable. So like I said, tonight we're here to talk about her newest one, The Lost and Found Bookshop. How are you doing tonight, Susan?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. John, this is just a treat. You're the first real person I've talked to all day. So I'm actually finishing up next year's book. And so I've been deep in my fictional world. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, shout out to Houston, my former stomping grounds.
Yeah, so how long ago was it that you lived in Houston?
I lived in Houston in the 1980s, so a good long time, but I have wonderful memories of being a teacher there. Mm-hmm. I taught in the Spring Branch School District, I taught at the Kincaid School, and I fed my reading habit at bookstores that I still remember, including Murder by the Book, mm-hmm. when I think Dean was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He lives in Mississippi now, but is still very much a part of the store. We email each other all the time. We're always sending him boxes of books. He's actually going to be moderating an event for us next month with some other cozy writers. So it's nice to see that he's still around and still a part of the family. Before we get into our chat, if anybody has any questions for Susan, McKenna is kind of behind the scenes monitoring Facebook. She'll be passing any of those questions along to me. So if you have some, please let us know. We've got copies of The Lost and Found Bookshop in the bookstore. It just came out Tuesday. Susan was also kind enough to send, can't see them because of my light, some signed book plates. So we've got signed book plates to go with them. And she was also gracious enough to buy some gift cards from us that we are going to be giving away. So before we get started, I wanted to announce that our first winner is Allison Faust. Allison, if you're tuning in, say hi in the chat and we will be in touch with you in the next couple of days to get you your gift card. So to get started, Susan, you want to tell us a little bit about The Lost and Found Bookshop?
You know, this book, I wrote this book during a momentous time in my life. It was a reflection of one of my sweetest, deepest fantasies, which is owning a bookshop. I think as a reader and as a writer, one of the joys of publishing and being in this book world is sharing that. And I've always fantasized about it. And so it was time for that fantasy to become real for me by, being the star of one of my books. And so even when I was little, I used to imagine what it was like to live in a garret up above a vintage bookstore, a creaky old building with the wooden floors. And, as I further, fantasized, it would be this vibrant community center. People would come and they would share. And so my fantasy in this book comes to life on a historic street in San Francisco. In a historic San Francisco. Needed to be there because it was a plot element that part of the building's history took place there. And it's about a woman who, it's about my favorite theme in fiction to write about and to read about. And it's about an ordinary person living her life, minding her own business, when this entire dramatic situation drops into her lap and she's the only one who can solve it. And so she is a successful wine executive, and she's but it's not a sexy wine job. She's like in digital inventory, but she was drawn to it because it's stable and it's secure, and it's everything that her chaotic childhood living above a bookstore was not. And so she's kind of fled that life, and so suddenly through giant cataclysmic event, she is flung back into the world where she inherits her mother's bookstore. She's in charge of her granddad, who's elderly and struggling with dementia and other health issues. And suddenly her entire life is turned upside down by it. And so I love characters at a moment of change. I love people forced into a corner and trying to make choices. And I also like a story about risk taking, because I started with somebody who was very risk averse, including emotionally risk averse. And her part of her journey was to become a more emotional, vulnerable, fulfilled character. And so this one, it's a very tender book. I had a book out last year called The Oysterville Sewing Circle, and it made quite a splash with readers, but there was a bit of anger in the book. This is more a tender story about this young woman and her journey. And part of the journey was the bookstore. So I'm celebrating. And in fact, I'm celebrating. I didn't even bring anything to drink with me because I just opened my email and it's been named a book of the week by People Magazine, or
That's
best
awesome.
book of the week. And yeah, thank you. Yeah, it'll be out tomorrow. The issue is out tomorrow. It says a tale about the silver linings of unwanted detours. So thank you, People Magazine. And I'm excited by that too.
One of the things that I loved about it is you sort of took the opposite approach to location. Usually you find, like, you know, she's living in this kind of smaller community where she's got this good job, and she leaves that behind to go back to the big city. And we're so used to, usually when we see stories like this, it's usually the opposite direction, where they're going from the big city kind of to the smaller town.
You're very perceptive. I kind of struggle with that. I thought, is it gonna expectations? Because a lot of readers, part of the fantasy is to get away from it all, move out of the city, find a simpler life somewhere else. And she has already done that, and she thinks that that's the right thing to do for herself. And then she's flung back to the city, and that's where she actually finds her home. And so it was a bit of a struggle for me to mess with that trope or something like that. But it is San Francisco. And one thing about cities that I love, and it's true of Houston as well, is cities are made up of neighborhoods. And it feels like a small town, a private, or not a private, but a neighborhood in a city is like, you see the same people, you go to the same places. And so she kind of reconnects with the neighborhood of her childhood in, I hope, what's a really cool way. And she came of age in the 90s in San Francisco. And so I got to really do a deep dive into what was going on there. The Counting Crows concerts and the flyovers, and where people got their Christmas trees and things like that in San Francisco. So that was a real pleasure for me to kind of reconnect with San Francisco in that way too.
Yeah, I think there's a moment where she mentions, like, her mom was always listening to Blind Melon, and I was like, oh my gosh, I know all of the music that she's talking about. This is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, I'm probably age-wise, I'm closer to the mom than to Natalie, but listening to songs like Blind Melon keeps us young, right?
Yeah. So you also mentioned in the acknowledgments that most of the books that you mentioned throughout the novel are all real. How did you pick and choose who you wanted to kind of include? One of my favorites was you mentioned Mary Kay Andrews' cookbook, and we're huge fans of hers at Murder.
Oh my God, yes, I love her as a person, and I love her books. So a lot of them were people who were friends of mine. I tried to always give a shout out to somebody who gave me a blurb. A blurb for listeners is when somebody, when another more famous and accomplished writer reads your book and says something good about it. Thank you, Garth Stein. Thank you, Erica Baumeister, for your good early reads and reviews. So I always try to shout out people who've boosted me up through my career, and just writers that I've loved. I've never met Christopher Moore, but I remember reading Practical Demon Keeping and just howling about it. And he was a Bay Area. So I did try to do, I tried to choose writers who were known for being in the Bay Area. And special shout out tonight to Gail Tsukiyama, who's a really good friend of mine. I've known her probably for 20 years, and she has a book out this week as well, same day as mine, same publisher, and her book is called The Color of Air. And I encourage everybody to read it. She's a fantastic writer. And one of my fantasies before the pandemic hit was that I'd be in a bookstore and we would both have an event at the same store at the same time this week. But she's in the Bay Area and I'm here in Puget Sound. And so we don't get to get together, but she is one of my favorite writers. So I would pick books and writers that I loved. Some of them thematically. There's a key scene in the book where a customer, there's a guy, a contractor who's like working on the bookstore and fixing it up. And his name is Peach Gallagher. And he's definitely one of those characters who's more than what he seems on the surface. You know, she thinks he's a contractor in a tool belt, you know, come to fix her store. And in reality, he's working and he's kind of overhearing something and he hears a customer request a book. And as a bookseller, you know this, it drives you nuts when you can't come up with the book. She's like, oh, it was about this woman and it had this and it had that. And Natalie can't come up with it. And Peach knows exactly what she's talking about. And the book turns out to be Love and Trouble by my friend Claire Dieterer. So sometimes it was the right book that kind of wandered onto the page because I needed to make a point.
There's another moment with Peach in the bookstore where she's telling a customer about a book and the customer is like, oh, okay, maybe I don't want it. And you hear kind of Peach from back, oh, that sounds really great. I'll take that. And which
Yes.
I know in the process of the book, it's kind of a setup, but as a bookseller, that's kind of the holy grail. If you're telling this customer over here about a book and somebody on the other side of the store hears you and they're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I want that too. That's like, it
Yes.
doesn't get any better than that.
I know I've actually tag teamed with fellow writers. We'll wander in, you know, we're all undercover because nobody knows what we look like. And so we're like, oh my God, I'm fanning myself. This is so good. So sometimes that's all it takes. And I did want to kind of put booksellers on a pedestal. I dedicated the book to booksellers because this career of mine, I sold my first book and I published it in 1987. And it's been my career ever since. And so much of that I owe to the fact that booksellers are willing to have my book, keep it in stock, recommend it. That's huge because you can't have a writing career if you don't have people who are willing to promote your book. So this book is kind of a love letter to that.
And one of the things that's kind of really fantastic about it is, you know, everybody sort of has this fantasy of what book selling is going to be, that it's, you get to sit around and you get to read all day. And like, it's this like magical kind of wonderful thing. And we don't get to read all day, but it is kind of magic and it's wonderful, but it's also kind of a lot of really hard work. And you capture that so well in the book, whether it's, you know, trying to figure out how you're going to pay the bills every night and just all of those things that we have to do day to day. So what kind of research did you do?
Did really, oh God, this was a really fun one because I went to bookstores. I went to Story and Song on Amelia Island, Florida, and I went to my local bookstores, Eagle Harbor Book Company, and I went to one in Colorado Springs, and the name escapes me. Anyway, I visited bookstores and kind of didn't really shadow them, but asked them to describe a day in the life. You know, what's your typical day like? And of course, there's too much minutia to include in a novel. But I tried to shade in the reality of you know, having a bookstore. And you're right. You know, we do want to sit around and read with our nose in a book all the day, but it's a business too, just like writing is a business. And so I definitely made friends with a lot of booksellers and got a lot of input. And one thing that really struck me is booksellers are optimists. They have a can-do attitude. They say, you know, this business has changed over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, but people are always going to want stories and they're always going to want books. And how can I stay relevant? And one thing that I learned by reading about a study from the Book Industry Study Group was that independent bookstores are actually having research. floundered for a while and then found their footing, and they're having a resurgence. And I've seen that in this pandemic as well. I've seen a lot of creativity and initiatives. You know, I've certainly done my share of getting curbside pickup of my book orders and things like that. So yeah, props to booksellers. They, you know, they just have a can-do attitude, and I love that.
And one of the wonderful things too, kind of that's really helped us, to give some shout outs to some of our book selling friends, like everybody's always so willing to share ideas. Like when we were trying to figure out how virtual events were going to work, we had a publicist from HarperCollins with our first event with Matthew Quirk was like, oh, this is how you do stuff. Let me just figure out how to feed it through Facebook, and helped us out. And then Kathy over at Blue Willow Bookshop was like, oh, if you guys are doing this, I have this document that explains some of the best practices for being able to do this. Let me share this with you. So yeah, it's a really wonderful community where everybody, you know, we've got a bookstore right across the street from us here in Houston. Brazos Bookstore in Blue Willow is kind of right around the corner from us. And we all, you know, we all want each other to succeed. So it's always like, what can we do to kind of help each other out, which is just a really wonderful thing too.
Well, that's something I tried to bring to life in the book, is a sense of community. And if sharp-eyed readers, if you're reading the book, pay attention to the bakery across the street, Sugar, because it's got a big story. And I think it might be the next book that I tackle when, you know, my publisher says, what are you going to write for us next? I've got some ideas, and they involve that bakery. So anyway, yeah, and that was something that just popped up because baked goods and bookstores are BFFs as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we have a little independent coffee shop right next to us that's they're more like they roast their own beans, and they're definitely kind of a part of our,
Ooh, nice.
too. Yeah.
Very nice.
So are your books, do they all take place in a shared world where like you might, you know, if a character might pop up here or there, if there's a business in one book, it might show up as a major feature in another one?
Not all, but many of them. And some of the people who read, I wrote 2 books that took place in Sonoma County in wine country, where my character in this book starts out. And there's a couple of walk-ons. So readers who are familiar with the Apple Orchard and the Beekeeper's Ball might recognize a couple of names and go, oh, I know them. So I do, sometimes there's a little bit of interaction, but it has to be that the book works on its own as well, because I want this book to be enjoyed by people who don't need all the extra backstory. So hopefully I did my job, and I did that, and also gave, you know, like a little, my editor called them Easter eggs, you know, when you put something in there. But my favorite Easter eggs are the ones that you mentioned, the books and the authors that I cite in the book, you know, recommended. Those are my favorite Easter eggs this time.
So before we get going with some more questions, let's do another
yes, please. Drawing
part. Yeah, so congratulations, Cindy Hartman. If you are tuned in, I know you've been tuning into a lot of these. You have just won a Murder by the Book gift card, and we will be in touch soon to get those details to you and get you your gift card. Let me look at my notes here. One of the other things that you really talked about, and I don't know that people, that I appreciated that I don't know people are aware of, is the concept of showrooming in books. So it was kind of nice to see somebody to tackle or even kind of bring that to people's attention. So if you guys aren't aware of what showrooming is, it is it's a process where people will come into, it could be a bookstore, a music store, you could be going into Home Depot, you kind of go in and you want to order something online, but you pop in first. You might snap a picture of it because you want to remember what it is when you get home, and order it online. So you basically kind of want the convenience of being able to go find it in a store and kind of look at it and then go somewhere later and find it for a cheaper price, which is kind of a frustrating thing kind of across the world. But it was really nice to see you kind of explain that in a very like, hey, this is just kind of what this is kind of way for people.
I did. I've seen it happen again and again. We all have, and it's understandable, and yet it's also frustrating because the booksellers work so hard to create this showroom and to put things on display. And so I included that little scene in there, and that was another kind of drawn from life scene where they come in and they start browsing to see what they're going to go home and order or download or whatever. And, you know, how a creative forward-thinking bookseller is gonna kind of go with try to make that.
It's like I said, yeah, it's one of those kind of just, so I've been at Murder by the Book for, this is my 10th year, and I was at, like I said, I was at Borders for like 7 years before that. So I've been in the industry for longer than it seems like necessary sometimes. But it's crazy to see how much kind of book selling has changed. And like you said, it's kind of one of those things where you always have to be adapting and figuring out like, what are people looking for? What is it that you can offer to people that they're not going to be able to find kind of online, and kind of being able to create that community. And I think one of the things that's hardest, I know for us and other booksellers that I've talked to, is like, we don't have our community at the moment. You know, if we get to see customers, it's because we're waving at them through the glasses. They come to pick up their curbside pickup stuff, or, you know, we're helping them recommend books.
Oh, no.
It really makes you appreciate kind of just being able to have people come in and get to, you know, catch up with them and how their day is, and, you know, what's going on in their life, especially in Houston, where we've had, you know, we had Hurricane Harvey and we had Tropical Storm Imelda, and we've had all these things. Like, so we know like which customers who, you know, their house flooded during this flood, they finally got it fixed. Now it's flooded again. So we miss kind of being able to get that connection with people. You can't quite get that as you're just kind of waving through the glasses they pick up their books.
I know that this was such a challenge in so many ways. Of course, the book was done, it was turned in, and at the point where, let's see, oh, you know what we were doing? I can even remember, because one thing that I always, that my publisher always does for me is they give me like beautiful end papers in the beginnings of my book, you know, here. So we had it all picked out. It was going to be like bird wallpaper or something like that. And the shutdown happened, and I got an email from my editor, and she said, "I'm so sorry, but we've got to wrap this up, and there's not going to be time to design the end papers." And so I'll always remember, you know, that day was where I realized, well, am I going to have a book tour? Am I going to have a book at all? And so there have been numerous challenges, and thank you to publishers also for working with the booksellers to try to make this feel like a normal book release. And it's the readers who save us every time. You know, they're like, I read that book, I need another book, you know, so thank goodness for that, because yeah, that's the reason that we're all here, is the avid readers, like I was. You know, that's why I write. I started writing books before I could even read or write. I would scribble things on paper and dictate them to my mom, and God love her, she would write them down. And so yeah, shout out to my mom too. She now lives with us in our home. She's elderly, and it's been quite a journey to kind of reconnect with her now that our roles are, you know, I think of her, she's quiet or whatever. And so a lot of the scenes between Natalie and her grandfather in the Lost and Found Bookshop are drawn from situations or thoughts that I've encountered with my elderly mom. And so that's why I think I mentioned before, it's kind of more of a tender book, not an angry book.
Yeah, there's so much heart in it. You know, as Natalie is kind of dealing with taking over the bookstore and kind of recreating her life, there's a real definite sense of kind of loss and sorrow there, but you also balance that really well with kind of moments of joy, so it doesn't feel like it's super heavy.
Yeah, you know, one of the slogans in the book is that Natalie says, and the publisher has kind of used it in their publicity materials, is that there's a book for everything. And what I mean by that is, at times in my life when there's something difficult happening or something joyful happening or something challenging or confusing or something like that, I can always find something in a book that will reflect it back at me or help me through it or something like that. And so that's what I mean. There's a book for everything, and it's kind of waiting on the shelf for you. And you know, and maybe you don't know which book that's going to be for you, but it will sort of shine through. And I think I cited, you know, Judy Blume in the book, getting Natalie through all of her awkward years and things like that. So I love that slogan. I'm glad that my publisher kind of is picking up on it and publicizing that aspect of it. Because the other thing that I've come to know through the years is that every reader reads a different book. You know, and we know this from book clubs. We all read the same book, but we all bring our own creativity and our own lived experience to the story, and it lands differently with every single reader. And so that's another reason why I love this moment. It's mine anymore. You know, I wrote it, I'm done, and the next step is for it to have a life of its own with readers. And so that's another reason I love that.
That's one of the wonderful things about getting to be a bookseller, is because you never know what book is going to be that book that somebody needs at any given moment. So, you know, getting to potentially be the person that gets to put that book in their hand that could potentially get them through a situation, or like this book, you know, kind of help them just escape for a little bit is really one of the best things about being a bookseller.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of questions from the audience. Bianca asks, if you could give your younger author self any advice, what would it be?
If I could give my younger author self advice, I would say have let your own natural voice come through. Because when I was a young emerging writer, I felt like I needed to sound a certain way on the page. I needed my books to be a certain type of book. And I found myself repressing my natural voice. And the books that really resonated with me and got published and well reviewed and everything are the books where I stepped out of my own way. Because in writing, as in a lot of other areas of life, sometimes we're our own biggest roadblocks. So step out of your own way, young writers, and let your natural voice come through. And the other thing is respect for the craft. Don't think just because you have great ideas and you have some talent that that's going to be enough. Have respect for the craft. And what I mean is, you know, if I turned my computer around, you would see like 4 shelves of books on the craft of writing. And so, they were my teachers. I didn't learn from taking classes so much. I'm sure I took a couple, but my teachers were the books that I read on writing and the books that became my guidelines for writing. And so, respect the craft, don't dismiss it, respect the language, step out of your own way, listen to your own voice.
So as a writer, when you're reading, do you find that you are kind of picking apart what is working in a book or what's not working in a book? Are you thinking about that as you read, or are you able to just kind of disconnect?
In one of my books or a book that I'm reading?
In the book that you're reading.
Okay, the books that I'm reading that just totally absorb me, I love it. I love it when the world falls away and I'm just in that story and I'm not. And it's rare. It's just like somebody who is a filmmaker watching a film, or when you see when you know a little too much about something, it's it's hard to miss. My husband is an apparel designer, and so he knows how every stitch of something is put together, and he sees the flaws where I might see a pretty outfit or something like that. And so it's the same way. When you know too much, you can see, oh, she's planted a seed here, and I know that it's going to, sprout up over here. And so I do see that. It's a bit of a clockwork sometimes, but a writer of skill is going to smooth that out. Here's an example from Lost and Found Bookshop. This is a very tiny writing lesson, because I know most people aren't interested in writing. They just want to read. But one of the things that I discovered about Natalie is that I wanted her journey as a character to be marked by how she looks in certain scenes. And that was just a matter of craft. I didn't make it. And so pay attention to what she's wearing in the key scenes, and you'll see her evolution as a character. So in the very opening scene, she's she's very corporate. She's wearing a business suit and a blazer and, a silk blouse and the pumps and everything. And she's living in her identity, but not in her essence. And she doesn't know it, it's unconscious. And then we see her going through several different iterations and what she wears throughout the book. And then I think in one of the final scenes, she's, she looks like us. She's wearing her yoga pants or whatever. But it was to show a character getting comfortable in her own skin. And probably a writer reading the book is going to go, oh, yeah, just focus on the I see that coming. But a reader is just going to feel that the journey feels authentic and that she is in a different place as a person by the end. So little things like that. But that's not to say I still, I love to read. I read all the time. I read myself to sleep every single night. I read fiction and nonfiction and literary fiction and popular fiction. And so I'm just an omnivore when it comes to reading.
So Andrea, then leading right into that, asks, what have you read recently that you recommend?
What have I read recently that I recommend? Oh, gosh, you're going to have to help me with the author's name because it's a very difficult name for me, but it's called Conjure Women and her, it starts with the letter A. Let me think. I don't have it in front of me because it's in the other room, but it's a multi-generational saga with a grandmother and from slave days and up to contemporary time. Anyway, it's unusual. It's a first novel. It's really exciting. And I think it was just published. So
yeah, and it's by Afia.
Yeah, right.
Afia Atakora. A-T-A-K-O.
Yeah, I made you say it. I didn't want to say it. I knew I would butcher it. Anyway, yes, that one. I loved how blunt and fresh that was, and I highly recommend it. So that's one that I've loved. Let's see, there's one, let's see, I'm looking up above. I just finished, let's see, new Susan Elizabeth Phillips. She's an iconic romance author. I just love her books. And let's see, I finished this book and I got to be on her podcast. It's called The Sweeney Sisters by Leanne Dolan. And she also, the author also has a podcast called The Satellite Sisters. And I was sent her book to endorse, to give a blurb to, and I liked it so much. And it's about, they find an extra sister because they did a 23andMe DNA test. And lo and behold, there's a new family member nobody knew about. So I enjoyed that one. I'm just finishing this one. It's called Black Girls Exhausted and this one is about a medical situation, and it's very dramatic and really, really well written. And yeah, so I have a book going in every room. I have a book on my e-reader, book on my phone. I panic if I don't have something to read.
Yeah. So. Are you one of those people when you go on vacation, you pack entirely too many books?
Oh my God, always. Yes. And one thing that I'm kind of fond of doing, I try to have paperbacks, rack size paperbacks. And I like to leave them in key places, on trains and in hotel rooms and waiting room, places where the next person might pick them up.
One of the benefits of being a bookseller is we get advanced reading copy books. So when most of us go on vacation, we will stack up on those because we can then, like you said, read them and then kind of leave them wherever we are for people to discover. Yeah. Andrea also asks, she said that the research that you did into bookstores sounds like a lot of fun. Was there anything that you learned while you were doing your research about bookstores and book selling that surprised you?
Yes. And it won't surprise you because you're a bookseller. It was the size of people's stock rooms. They are tiny. And and it's the fact, I always thought that there was this vast warehouse right behind you that has like every book in the world. No, the bookstore's inventory is on the shelf. What you see is what you get. They've got almost no room for backstock. If there's a cubic inch in the store, they're going to put a book on there and try to sell it to you. So I found that really kind of charming. The book comes and it goes. So I loved that about it. And one thing that happened because of the pandemic is the publisher produced a lot of advanced reading copies, which you mentioned, of the Lost and Found Bookshop. And they produced them especially for independent booksellers. And they sent out several hundred and invited booksellers to respond and write back to the publicist. And most of them went to bookstores in, I think, early March. And so we had a lot of feedback of booksellers saying, I grabbed this book as I was racing out the door right before we closed. And, here's what I thought of it. So I thought that was really, I was so glad that I got in under the wire because you guys were not allowed out or in. Wow.
Yeah, we were really lucky here in Houston that things, well, I guess maybe not so lucky at the moment with our numbers the way they are, but we weren't locked down as like New York was. So we were actually at Murdered by the Book, we were able to get back in the store. But like publishers, like certain publishers, like you couldn't get ARCs because they were in publicist offices and publicists were working from home. I think I was trying to set up one event and I was talking to a publicist on the phone and she's like, wait a minute, I have really bad reception in my apartment. If I stand on my couch the right direction, they'll be able to hear me. Or like just warehouses were closed. So there was like an ARC like desert for a while and we're just kind of starting to see where they're kind of starting to sprinkle back in. Yeah. So you were really lucky that you got in under the wire for people to grab those.
I did, yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit earlier when we started chatting, but for anybody who has tuned in while we've been talking, Melissa asked, what was your inspiration for this book?
My inspiration for this book was my mom. She was talking about she has early dementia. And so, and I would ask her things. I would say, well, what does it feel like? And she'd say, well, it feels normal, but when I see your father over there, I realize that something is just a little bit off about me. And because my father's been gone since 2015. And so I started really thinking about her and doing a lot of reading about dementia and caring for people who are on this path and on this journey. And I read a book called Advice for Future Corpses, which is a really grim title, but a really cool book. And it was written by an RN. And it's how you listen to people and don't try to fix them. Don't try to correct them. You just listen to them and let them live their reality. And I was very inspired by that as well. And so some of my favorite scenes to write and the ones that I'm proudest of in this book are in the granddad's point of view, where he's thinking he remembers things from when he was 6 years old, like they were 5 minutes ago and things like that. That really kind of came to life to me. And so that was, and I give that all back to my mom. She's been my mentor and my supporter all my life. And it's kind of a privilege to care for her. And so I wanted to sort of honor this thing that she's going through and not make light of it, but to make it seem like it's authentic and it's not, an everyday tragedy. It's just something that happens in life.
So it's interesting then that if your mom inspired that storyline in the book, did you use the grandfather to tell the story because it would just be too close if it was she was dealing with her mother having dementia issues?
Yes, and also because I wanted she needed a male figure in her life because she grew up the daughter of a single mom. But I also wanted to bring in a couple of several options for love. She's in her 30s. She's a bookseller. She's adorable. What's not to like, right?
Yeah.
And so she needed some options. And I kind of wanted some interplay between the grandfather and the different people who come to the store and the different people who come into her life. And so I definitely, yeah. And maybe so, maybe psychologically go there, to, and make it reflect too exactly, because real life is way too complicated for fiction.
Yeah.
And so I kind of probably had to distance myself from my real life situation, but still have it reflect and feel like an authentic situation.
So before we get into a couple more questions, let's do another gift card giveaway.
Yes.
So we've already, if you tuned in and you missed, we've already given one away to Allison Faust and Cindy Hartman. So next up we have George Beach. So George, if you are tuning in, congratulations, and we will be in touch to get you your gift card soon. So in the book, kind of as it's divided into parts, at each one of the starts of it, you have kind of a quote or a little vignette from a book. How did you pick those? Did you pick them, or did your publisher come up with them?
No, I picked them, and I picked them probably right off my shelves. I didn't have to go far to find, one thing that I love about books is that there's so much wisdom in the pages, and I'm definitely a page marker and a highlighter. Some people think that's disrespect, but for me, I have to remember. And so they're marked passages in books that I've loved and I wanted to share. And the very first one, I think is the very first one, from Tuck Everlasting. Natalie Babbitt came and visited my classroom when I was a teacher at the Kincaid School. And I just remember her reading that line from Tuck Everlasting to my fifth graders, and I got chills. You don't have to live forever. You just have to live. And it's a little bit longer than that, but that just kind of stuck with me. And I thought, I want to, show the theme of each section of the book with wisdom from a book that I've loved. And so I got to pick those, and it was really kind of gratifying to go back and visit some of my favorites.
So what's the process when you pick those? So after you've picked them, do you have to go back to the author or their estate and ask for permission to use it?
No, if it's just a quote and it's attributed, it's called fair use. Okay. And so you can, which is interesting because you can't do that with a song.
Yeah.
That's still, so like you mentioned, No Rain by Blind Melon. Mm-hmm. I really would have liked to use the whole line, about staying in bed and reading a book or whatever it is. But I wasn't able to do that because I would have had to get permission, and it's very complicated to do that. So I just cited the song, figuring most people would be familiar with it.
It's really interesting that you can just quote books, and as long as you say who it is, you don't have to ask for permission. That's cuckoo.
No, I know. And it's because, I guess it's because it's attributed, mm-hmm. and there's probably a limit. I wouldn't, take a whole chapter out of somebody's book, but I would take, a couple of lines.
Yeah. One of the things, we kind of talked about this, as a writer reading, as a bookseller, sometimes it's tricky to read a book that's set in a bookstore because you're like, oh, if they get this wrong, it's going to be like the doctor watching the medical show. You're like, no, that's not how it works. Or like right. When you watch, I think it's the TV show Younger, and they're like at a book signing and they're like signing it like on the front flap. I'm like, that's not where people sign books. That's not how you do it.
Oh.
One of the things I think you also nailed is the absolute terror, both on the bookseller end and the author end, of having an event where nobody shows up.
Yes. Okay. That one is a scene from life. I had so much affection for my fictional author. Her name is Quill Ranson. I thought that was a cool name. And she has that nightmare book event that almost every author I know has had, almost every bookseller has endured, where you get the flowers ordered, you order, stacks and stacks of books, and you send out invitations, and you do everything. And for whatever for even a popular author, and for whatever reason, they don't show up. And so I wanted to kind of highlight that, because there's a very successful book signing later in the book. So I wanted that one to be a kind of a low moment, a moment of defeat. And we all have stories, of and one reason, actually, back to the gift cards, one reason that I always do a gift card giveaway at every one of my book events is that I want the bookseller to have something in his till as a result of me having been to the bookstore. And so that's my little way of doing it. And believe me, there have been times when I've definitely spent more than, my books have sold in bookstores. Just, it's a, book readers are quirky. Some readers would rather just stay home and read a book, and they'll think, I don't want to go meet her. I love her books, but why would I go meet her? I just want the next book. And so there's definitely risk involved in doing that. And I thought it was interesting where I signed the Lost and Found Bookshop, because they gave me a 2-page spread. Usually the title page has the author's name and the title. And with this one, they kind of spread it out, which I like, because you might wonder when you see this, when you first start the book, why are there feathers and there's a bird on the front? And it turns out to be one of the secrets that they found in the Lost and Found Bookshop. So I don't want to spoil it, but there's definitely the cover will make even more sense and be even prettier when you realize, why they chose that cover for it.
So without giving spoilers away to the secrets, did you have those plotted out when you started?
Absolutely. Yes. I knew I love a treasure hunt in a book, and I love something that kind of grows organically through the story. I didn't know like all the details, but I definitely knew that I wanted something that dramatic to happen, and I didn't realize that it was going to happen when they were I don't know when they were finally getting together in the end, but anyway, yeah, I always envisioned that, and I don't always know that when I write. Sometimes I sort of try to write towards an ending that works for me, and sometimes I have the ending in mind.
Melissa asks if you're writing a holiday book this year.
I'm not, and I want to. I miss doing that, and I love writing those, but my writing schedule has changed a lot. My publisher has changed. I used to write for Mira Books, which is an imprint of Harlequin, and then Harlequin was bought by HarperCollins. It's very convoluted, but I ended up at this very mainstream imprint, the William Morrow Books, and they don't have the same schedule. So I don't, but I added probably the last scene that I wrote for Lost and Found Bookshop was the Christmas scene. Oh. It wasn't there, and there was something that felt like it was missing from a piece of the story was missing. And so I wrote a Christmas scene, because there's nothing more fun than Christmas at a bookshop. And so I kind of missed that. And so that scene was added. I think it was the last scene that I wrote. It's not the last scene chronologically. So hopefully this book will still be available at Christmas, and it will kind of have a Christmassy feel. We'll see.
So you mentioned your writing schedule being different. How has COVID-19 changed kind of your daily routine?
I wish I could sit here and keep a straight face and say, oh, it hasn't changed at all. I work by myself and I work from home, and so it didn't change a thing. And it sucks. I am so distracted, and I'm so I don't know, I'm so like hypersensitized to the news of the day, and every moment something happens, and it's not just the pandemic, it's freaking 2020. Every time you turn around, there's something else happening. And so I'm very distracted, and I'm disappointed in myself, because I thought, oh, I should be writing twice as fast, because I've got all this extra time. I don't have to go somewhere. I don't have to do this. And it's kind of the opposite. And I'm frustrated with myself. I'm not complaining. One thing my mother likes to say is no complaining on the yacht, meaning if you have a job that you love and you're living your dream or whatever, it's unseemly to whine about that. But I have to be honest and say, I found this situation, and that's on me.
I will say, though, having talked to lots of authors virtually doing lots of these events, if you are actually getting words on paper and you're able to write it all, consider it a win. If you're not doing twice what you were doing, but you're doing anything at all, it's a win. So.
Yeah, I'm finishing up a book right now. here's what an unfinished book looks like. I write all my books in longhand,
Wow.
page after page. Yeah, and it's a mess. But I'm finishing a book right now. It's called, my working title is American Princess, and it's about a woman who's struggling with her white privilege. And this, I wrote the book before all the pandemic hit and the white privilege situations hit. I was already writing about a character struggling with that. And so as this is all coming, to a boiling point, it's getting a lot more dramatic, the book that I'm writing. And so she is an American princess, but she's going to make a very big life choice to do better. And so this whole situation right now is going to inform the revision process when I rewrite the book.
So we are just getting close to time. So we have one more gift card to give away, and that is for Leslie Griffith. Leslie, congratulations if you were tuning in. Like I said, we will be in touch soon. And again, Susan, thank you so much for doing the gift cards. We really appreciate that. Before we wrap up, just wanted to mention we've got a lot more events coming up this week. Tomorrow night, we'll be chatting with Laura Prescott for her book, The Secrets We Kept. And also Kate Quinn will be chatting with her with The Huntress, which is another William Morrow HarperCollins
Not to be missed. Yes, I love that book.
And then on Saturday evening or Saturday afternoon at 2, I will be chatting with Beatrice Williams for her new book, her Last Flight, which is also William.
God, I just read that one.
It's
I
so
just bought that. Yeah, I just started that one. Yeah.
I have like 100 pages left. As soon as we're done with this, I'm going to finish it. So it's been like William Morrow week here virtually at the store. We are still closed for browsing, but we are offering curbside pickup. We're doing mail orders. We just got in like 30 different varieties of puzzles, so you can order those at murderbooks.com or give us a call, 713-524-8597, and we're happy to help you over the phone. We have plenty of copies of the Lost and Found Bookshop in stock. As we mentioned, Susan was kind enough to send us some book plates. We've also got some sewing kits from her other books and some other little swag stuff, so get your orders in while we still have that stuff. Susan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're so welcome. This was such a pleasure. My favorite hour of the day so far.
Good. And thank you for this wonderful book that it does bookstores justice, and it's just a treat. So I hope everybody will pick up a copy and check it out and let us know what you think about it. And hopefully, Susan, we will get to do this at the store back in Houston again at some point.
I would love to. Thank you, John. And thank you to everybody who stopped by.
So take care.